So our next presenter is going to talk to us about the history of TryLight Theatre. TryLight's in its 26th year of entertaining the residents with mystery, intrigue, comedy, song, and even the occasional dance. For those of you who may not know, the play being presented this week was an original play written by our presenter today, Gord Day-Janz. So if Gord could come out here, I just want to welcome him to the stage here at Common Ground. And I also want to thank him and First Baptist Church for providing us all with such a quality experience. These things don't come off easy. They're a great deal of work and a huge commitment for everyone involved in each production that you put on. It's remarkable to me the number of people that sign up for it more than once. So
Me too.
Anyway, welcome, Gord, and thank you again on behalf of all of us.
Thank you very much. Wayne asked me if I was going to pace, and I assured him that I was going to stick very, very close to my script today because I'm nervous. The history of TryLight Theatre Company is inextricably connected to First Baptist Church, whose current structure was built in 1955. The stage that was included in the basement of that new building was built to cover a huge rock. And it was a welcome addition for the young adults at first who used the tiny stage to provide live entertainment for themselves and for the members of the church. That was in the late 50s and early 60s. Fast forward to the 1980s. To the late 1980s. The church had spent a year looking for a new pastor and, for good or bad, had just hired me. My initiation into the world of live theater had occurred 17 years earlier during my final year of high school. For the first time, the small private school for missionary children that I attended in Zitzenkirch, Germany, had decided to stage a full-length play. We had always done the obligatory Christmas pageants, but never a full-length play. Showing interest was about all that was needed to get a part in the production. The school, to their credit, did things right. They rented a local hall in a nearby town that had a stage and backstage area. They rented flats to create the scenes and lighting as well. The backstage area where we had to change had the worldly aroma of stale beer and decidedly unmissionary entertainment. It was delightful and I was smitten. And though it would take 17 years for me to act on my newfound love, it was never far from my mind. My wife Judy and I arrived in Kenora in January of 1989 to a winter that made us wonder if we had landed in an abandoned part of the world. I remember getting the keys to the church and looking around when I was there on my own. I wandered into the basement. Sorry, we now call it the lower auditorium. As I stood on the stage, I noticed an opening high up on the far wall. An appropriate space for a tech room. There were definite possibilities here for the makings of good theater, and my imagination was ignited. At the time Judy and I came to First Baptist, the churches around North America, or at least those who defined themselves as conservative evangelical churches, were in the closing years of a church growth movement. Hiring a new pastor seemed like a good time for the church to take a look at who they were and what they might have to offer the community, with an eye, of course, to increasing membership. To determine the congregation's impact on the community, it was suggested we simply go around town and ask people if they knew where First Baptist Church was. One of our members went down to the Shell station 1 block from the church and asked the question. The response was a little disheartening, to say the least. No, they did not know where First Baptist Church was. This naturally encouraged a discussion as to what we could do to raise the profile of our church in the community. I can't remember what the discussion was in general, but I do remember thinking about the stage at one end of the lower auditorium and the opening in the wall on the other. I didn't say too much out loud, but we decided to test the waters. Was there a possibility to use our facility to entertain? Our first attempt was a dessert theater. The one-act play that was chosen was called If Moses' Wife Had Been a Practical Woman, starring Jack Hendy as Moses. Not a barnstormer, but a humorous look behind the scenes at how Moses came to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, and it was a success. Christmas is always a time to get people interested in church things, as the story of Jesus' birth can be told in so many different ways. We chose to do it with short musicals that included all ages, with titles like What's Up Down in Bethlehem and Angels Aware. You can guess that we took a lighter take on the Christmas story. They were all very entertaining. The problem, however, was that while we were including Sunday school kids whose parents were not necessarily part of our congregation, we really weren't engaging the community. Sometime in 1990, I approached Linda Lange and asked her if she would be interested as a bridge to the community to establish a theater company. As I recall, she didn't hesitate. She immediately said yes, and the seeds of TryLight Theater Company were planted. Neither of us had done something like this before. We had absolutely no idea how to go about establishing a theater. We did know this, give us some credit, that live theater was all about the show. So we decided we needed to find a show and get it on stage. Linda is a writer, and I had recently read a fascinating book about a young man who grew up in Nazi Germany as a pastor's kid. The compelling story described how he had been initiated into the Hitler Youth and the difficulty he had trying to figure out how faith and peer acceptance worked in a very complicated world. Not a comedy. Linda agreed to turn the story into a play. The gentleman who wrote the book, Reinhold Kirsten, was a Baptist pastor in Canada, and I was acquainted with him. It was decided that I should invite him to come for the weekend of the show, and he agreed. Casting for the show was interesting. We had trouble finding a boy to play the part of the lead character, so Linda cast Susan Evenden. I believe most of the cast and crew from that show were from our congregation. On March 1st of 1991, about a month before production, TryLight Theater Company was officially born. There we go. Okay. Here's a newspaper picture of a plaque with our logo being unveiled and mounted on the wall outside the church. You will, if you can see properly, you would see that Linda is also very pregnant and gave birth to her daughter about a week or two before the show started. Our stage is quite small. I'm still trying to get my head around how we managed. Oh, I went the wrong way. There we go. How we managed to get actors and set pieces, which included beds, on the even tinier stage that we had back then. In addition to finally having our first stage production, there was a big moment each night after the show was over when the author of the book stepped out into the homemade spotlight and said, "The young man in that story is me." And he ended the story, told the rest of the story for us. As we moved to develop this young theater company, Linda and I decided that we would stage 2 shows a year, one in the spring and one in the fall. The spring show had been a success, but what to do next? We were pretty keen on keeping things on a more faith-based footing, so the next show we chose was called Family Outings. It was a story of a family who had just purchased a vacation cottage, which resulted in hilarious complications, but also brought out hidden tensions within family relationships. Linda directed. I was one of the characters in the play. We opened up the casting for this show to the community and had at least one person from outside of our congregation join us. It was a heartwarming story, and while ticket sales didn't go through the roof, we were quite encouraged. Our next show was called The Carpenter. It was a rather plodding play set in modern times, but essentially a retelling of the story of Jesus. We again opened the audition process up to the community, and again, the community responded. New people were included in our little company. The show was not a raging success, but it gave us the confidence that we could actually stage a large, full-length show. A play is built around conflict. No conflict, no play. Nor does building a theater come without conflict. In 1993 and 1994 were conflict years for TryLight. In the fall of 1992, after doing The Carpenter, we decided to do something entirely different and staged 3 one-act plays. I only remember one of the plays. It was called Choosing Sides for Basketball, and it was all about the hurts and lessons we learn when we get chosen last in gym class. What is more memorable is that we put the stage on the floor of the auditorium and built seating, some of it slightly raised, around the stage area. We were encouraged by the fact that there were more and more people from the community getting wind of our little company, and with these 3 plays, we had even more people join in on our fun. In the spring of 1993, we made what turned out to be a disastrous decision. We were invited by what is now Clarion Hotel to do a dinner theater on their premises. We were delighted, of course, and chose a Neil Simon comedy called God's Favorite. The hotel management was not pleased with the choice because they felt people would not come to see a show that had the name God in the title. We were pushed for time to choose a play, and I came across one called Tally's Folly. It was a good play, but had one huge problem which we didn't consider until it was too late. It only required 2 actors. 2-actor plays are notoriously difficult because of the demands on the actors. We had 2 actors who had been a part of our last 2 shows who seemed willing to take on the challenge. The hotel agreed, and we began our rehearsals. The Rosewood Room is not an ideal space for theater, which we discovered too late as well. The show was, to be kind, a flop. On one night, one of the actors skipped 23 pages of dialogue, and the other actor had to patiently bring them back so that the play would make any sense at all. Just to give you an idea of how badly it went, Ruth Bowick was present one night to review the show. The food got rave reviews, the show got nothing. When we were done at the hotel, we took the show to our theater stage for a limited run. It was decided that one of the jokes in the play was perhaps too racy for church audiences, and so without consulting the actors, we removed the offense. This was met with cries of playing fast and loose with the script, and the actors almost quit the show. It was during this time that a group of actors who had been part of our little company decided that they wanted to form their own theater company to do what they described as more sophisticated plays. We were just barely 3 years old at the time, and I had a crisis of confidence. We would never be able to compete with a group that wanted to do more sophisticated plays. We may as well just give up. Linda Lange comes from strong, stubborn stock, and I am ever so grateful for this. She was not at all intimidated and simply stopped my sniveling and whining by announcing that we had been right to start the theater company and weren't going to let a little trouble get us down. We would regroup, retool our little theater company, and we would keep on. We did 2 short plays that fall. I Never Saw Butterfly and The Last Leaf, one of them again starring none other than Jack Hendy. Audiences were small but supportive. For a number of reasons, the spring of 1994 was a watershed moment for the theater. It all began when Jack and Jackie Hendy, who had always been great supporters of the theater, had been in England at some point, and they came back excited about a show that they had seen while they were there. It was called Charlie's Aunt. I love it when Jack starts telling a story and has a hard time finishing it because he's laughing so hard. That's what happened when he told us about this show, and he encouraged us to stage it. Charlie's Aunt had its own share of difficulties. 3 sets were needed. The comedic timing needed to be well rehearsed and well executed. We not only struggled to cast the show, but also had difficulty figuring out the staging. Linda was directing, but was having trouble with this complicated show. At that time, a young couple had started to attend our church. Doug was a Kenora boy, and Lynette was the daughter of summer residents from the United States. They fell in love, and after starting a family, decided to move back to Kenora and live in Canada. Lynette had studied theater and had worked as an apprentice at the esteemed Steppenwolf Theater in Chicago. They were both delighted to be invited to be a part of our theater and Charlie's Aunt. Lynette began helping Linda with directing, and the show finally came together. As we continued preparing for Charlie's Aunt, Linda and I decided we needed help in running the theater. We looked for people who might be interested in working as an advisory board. After talking to numerous people, we recruited Jane Davidson and Jackie Hendy. What an absolute gift these 2 people were. Lynette was encouraging us to take some risks with the show. With her encouragement and Jane and Jackie's guidance, we rented costumes from Winnipeg and theater lighting for the show. We didn't have the money, but Lynette, Jackie, and Jane were convinced that we would make enough to cover the show, the costs. The show was a smashing success with sellout crowds of both church and community people, and we were elated. We were floating on air. The success of that show led us to make a rather significant decision. We decided that we would no longer do strictly religious plays, but would try and find plays that reaffirmed our values as Christ followers with stories that had redemptive qualities to them. The play we chose next to do was called An Inspector Calls, and we applied for the rights of the show and were given approval to stage it. A few weeks before audition, we were informed that Broadway was mounting a revival of the play and had been given worldwide rights to it. This meant that it could not be staged anywhere in the world, literally, during the Broadway run and the tour that was planned for their production. Our rights were rescinded, and again we found ourselves rushing into making a choice for a play. With some fear and trepidation, we chose The Rainmaker. The Rainmaker was an interesting play, and the casting was quite genius. It was the first time we actually hauled someone off the street to be a part of the show. Mark Raymond happened to be walking past the church during our search for actors, and someone who knew him ran after him and dragged him into the church to audition. Just yesterday, Mark, with his distinct baritone voice, completed what I believe is his 25th show with us. As a cast, we struggled with the show. Each of the cast members needed to relate to their character in a convincing way. This wasn't easy. One of the challenging things about acting is that the actor, if they want to even be remotely convincing, must give in to the character being portrayed. It's surprising how intense the feelings of these fictional characters can become. Through my character, I was forced to relive some of the rejection and accompanying hurt and sadness I had experienced as a teenager. It was also the first time we would actually have a romantic kiss on stage. I was one of those who had to do the kissing. And Lynette, who was directing the play, despaired. At one point, she yelled at me, "Gord, I'm not sure how you ever had children." While the theater seemed to be getting back on its feet, rumbles of dissatisfaction began to grow within the church. An increasing number of people were unhappy with the theater being part of the church. Meetings were held where the merits of theater were discussed and argued about. Some of the peoples whose lives had been changed positively by taking part with TryLight were given the right to speak their piece. Nothing seemed to pacify the mounting unhappiness about the theater company in the lower auditorium. It's a good thing when people have strong convictions, and it's also good when they live out their convictions. Quite a number of our members decided in that year and the years that followed to leave our congregation. It was a sobering time of reflection, both for the church and for the theater. If I were ever to try and establish another theater company in the lower auditorium of a church, I would certainly do things differently. I would be more patient and sensitive to the challenges that it presents, especially to those who struggle with the idea of linking church and theater. I'm still amazed and ever so grateful that the church stood firm in their support of me and the theater. I don't think it was always easy because there was no guarantee of any tangible results. We survived those years, and I believe we have learned many lessons. In the end, I think we have become a more accepting group of people, willing to embrace those that don't look or act or share the same beliefs that we do. In the following years, many good things happened to TryLight. In 1996, Murray and Deb McDonald moved to Kenora. With Murray, we had another director and a very accomplished actor. With Debbie, we had an organizer and a promoter. Both of them would give many volunteer hours to the organization and help make it the company it is today. I remember very well the first time I met Murray. We were auditioning for the show called Sabrina Fair. For me, the auditions were going very well. I had my eye on one of the lead roles, and since no one was challenging me for it, I was quite confident that I would get it. Murray walked in and did his audition, and I instantly knew that things were not going to go well for me. In the years that followed, we competed for more than one part, and I think Murray justifiably always won. I'm not bitter. It was Murray who introduced us to musical theater. He had directed an adaptation of O. Henry's Gifts of the Magi, which wasn't in the strict sense of the word a musical, but included songs. It was only fitting that he direct our first musical, It's a Wonderful Life, the musical. It was, I believe, our first complete sellout show and prepared us for future musicals. Murray kept bugging me to do Fiddler on the Roof. I kept refusing even to consider it, as our stage was way too small and the commitment was far too great. I finally gave in, and for the fall production of our 10th anniversary, we committed to staging the musical. To say that Fiddler on the Roof was a game changer for us is an understatement. First of all, it introduced us to Pauline Martin, she's here today, who has become my partner in musicals over the past 15 years. Second, it required me to do the unimaginable and turn Murray McDonald down for a lead role, as Jan Boutwell was our choice for Tevye. Yes, give him a hand. While Murray had experience on his side, Jan brought an enthusiasm and a freshness to the character that was appealing to us. Jan took the role and made it his own. He was so ready for the part and put his heart and soul into it, as did the rest of the cast, and it was a big cast. When we announced auditions, we could not imagine the quality of performers that we would attract. But not only performers, artisans who painted for us and helped build the set. It was an amazing experience that set the bar for all other productions. It's the little things in a show that make a difference. Siobhan Strain was part of the cast. She played the youngest daughter who ends up falling in love with a non-Jewish Russian. It breaks her father's heart. I was at the back of the house every night of the show when Siobhan would come running down the center aisle with real tears streaming down her face because of the rejection of her father. I wish that I had time to walk you through all the shows that we have staged, as each has its own stories and charms. Stuff that happens backstage that none of you are ever aware of. A young actor who exited the stage threw up once into the hands of a stagehand and then said, "I need to be back on stage," and away she went. In our production of The Christmas Carol, there were 3 actors, these 3 young ladies, who had 40 or more costume changes between them. We were, of course, very careful backstage to make sure that privacy was protected. Curtains were hung up to create separate change rooms for men and women. I spent one of the shows backstage, and it was crazy wild back there. Everyone was focusing on getting their costumes changed and getting back on stage. Concerns for privacy in the change rooms were abandoned, while costumes were flying everywhere. It was more fun than watching the actual show. There are still shows that people didn't want to see, and very often it was simply the title that caused them to make their choices. John Lennon and Me, a play that not only featured a very young cast, but also a director that was only 18 years old, was avoided because people thought it was going to be the story of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, which might be one to avoid. Another was Over the River and Through the Woods. The title suggested to people that it was a children's story based on the song, and that was enough to have people give it a pass. Instead, it was a delightful story of two sets of Italian grandparents whose children were all gradually moving away to other parts of the United States. It was belly laugh funny, but also very touching. The cast we had was amazing, including Lisa Moncrief, I might add. Murray MacDonald played Nunzio, a loud, often annoying type of character. Murray's wife Debbie expressed her bitterness that Nunzio refused to stay on the stage but would come home with Murray long after the show was over. It was just after Christmas that I was thinking about casting for the play Over the River Through the Woods, and I happened to be at the museum during the Guys and Gals traditional Christmas concert. As they walked up the ramp, I saw a gentleman and turned to my wife and said, "This is an example of how we do casting." And I said, "I want him for my show." He was somewhat young for the part, but had features that could easily be aged. He had a rugged handsomeness to him that in my mind made him perfect for an Italian grandfather. The problem was I didn't know who he was. I asked around, got his name, and learned that he attended St. Albans Anglican Church. I called the church to see if they could give me further information, and surprisingly, for some reason, they did. They gave me his phone number, and when I called the gentleman to ask him if he might be, I just called him up and said, "Would you like to do theater?" And he replied without hesitation that he'd been thinking about doing something like that for quite some time, and he became a part of the cast. The cast came together very quickly once we started rehearsals, and everyone found their characters without problems. A young Riley Sleeman was a part of the cast, and while she has been on stage since, most of her amazing work has been done backstage as our premier stage manager, affectionately referred to as the Queen of the Universe. Yes, give her a hand as well. We couldn't give tickets away to that show. We actually entered a scene from the play in the Festival of the Arts. The first words out of the adjudicator's mouth after seeing the scene was, "It makes me want to see the rest of the play." One of TryLight's major challenges is finding plays that we feel comfortable putting on stage, but will also have audience appeal. In choosing a play, we do think about name recognition, but at the same time, feel it's important to take risks on no-name plays, as well as plays that deal with challenging subject matter. Carol Shields' play, Departures and Arrivals, is an example of that. While the playwright had name recognition, the play did not. The format of the play, a series of loosely connected vignettes all taking place in an airport, was quite different from anything we had done before, and the subject matter of some of the vignettes was for more mature audiences rather than family audiences. The risk paid off as it attracted new and younger patrons. We're grateful that in recent seasons our patrons have been more willing, you, our patrons, have been more than willing to attend shows that are new or unknown. It has allowed us to stage plays like Wit, a powerful play about life and dying, starring Brenda Chodine. Frozen Dreams, a humorous look at life on the streets at Christmas time, and of course, The Fashion Plate Bandit by our own Phil Burke. We have an incredible group of men affectionately known as set elves. You saw one of them in the first story here this afternoon or this morning, who work magic on our stage. They have built us castles, taps that work, blankets that dance in midair, centers whose back legs move with the front legs, full-sized cars that magically appear on stage, and most recently a stage that revolves. They rarely say no to a challenge, and when called upon, will even reluctantly paint the walls. And then there is Irene McQuaig, who seems to enjoy our big canvas to paint on. Our only regret is having to paint over the many scenes she has created. Theater is not only for actors to play, but for costumers, makeup artists, hairdressers, and more. We have set up an official board to guide us, composed of 3 community members and 4 from our church family. At present, Nadine McDonald is the chair of our board. I have been appointed artistic director, and Lynn McKay is our administrative director, and Ruth Gerard, our treasurer. Our growth can be attributed to the great board members that have led us. We have a steady group of volunteers who make it possible for us to stage the plays. We run into wonderfully creative people who sometimes play with us for a short while, and others who keep coming back. This has been our place to play, and we have. In the last 15 years, we have been a time of growth. We have explored other ways of doing theater. I hope I'm right here. Yes, I am. From street theater, which these young people were a part of for a number of years, to theater camps, but have always come back to what we are passionate about. People of the community coming together to create magic on the stage, over the rock, on the lower auditorium of First Baptist Church. We are also grateful to you, our faithful patrons. In our 25th anniversary year, you made it possible for us to sell out all of our shows. We don't know what the future holds for us, but we do know that we will continue to offer a safe place to play and create. Thank you.